Hi, Alan Mosman again, and another video in our elder training series. I think this is number 4, and this one is going to be about finances in the life of the church. Both the finances that come from good stewardship and the finances that have to do with paying for the things that make for ministry. So I have been a moderator of numerous sessions, and one of the things that is very common at all session meetings is for the treasurer to make some sort of financial report. Usually multiple pages of numbers and squiggly lines and confusion for a lot of people. And I am not a CPA and don't even play one on television. But there are some things I learned that you need to know, because as an elder on the session, you bear fiduciary responsibility for the receipt and use of the funds that come through the church. And you need to understand and be comfortable with looking at those financial statements and understanding what's going on. Now, one of the things that makes church accounting different is that it's called fund accounting, F-U-N-D, fund accounting. And my friends who are CPAs like to use the line, fund accounting is not fun accounting. So the reason you do fund accounting is because you have different types of income that come to the church. The type that is the easiest to deal with is the unrestricted gift. It's the donation that comes in the offering plate on Sunday morning. It's someone paying their pledge to the church. It's some former member who's moved away that got a Christmas bonus and they send you $50. Those are unrestricted gifts. So they go into the account and they can be used in any way that the session deems appropriate. Now, the second type of gifts that the church receive are temporarily restricted gifts. That means the restricted part is that the donor of the gift has placed a restriction on the gift. The gift can only be used for. And at Parkway, the example that our treasurer most often uses is the flower fund. Every Sunday at Parkway, we have flowers in the sanctuary, and someone pays for those flowers and usually offers a dedication why those flowers are given. So they make a donation to the church, but it's not an unrestricted donation. The donation is very much restricted. It's restricted to pay for flowers. And it's temporarily restricted because while the money comes in to the church, it's also going to go back out. The temporary is that passing through the church, but restricted for a particular purpose. The other types of gifts you get are permanently restricted gifts. These are your endowment gifts. People give a memorial gift to the endowment fund in memory of someone, and the gift itself is permanently restricted. The session cannot use the gift that is given. The session may be able to use the interest off of the gift. So at Parkway, for instance, we have a general endowment fund and 2 named endowment funds. The general endowment fund, again, every year it gains interest. We have it invested with the Texas Presbyterian Foundation. They give us a rate of return, and every year we make a determination about how that interest earned on that endowment is to be spent. We have 2 other endowments, though, that even the interest on the endowment itself is restricted in how it can be used. So one of them is restricted for theological education. A couple that gave money to the church years ago wanted Parkway to be able to help the people from the church, and there have been quite a few of them, who have gone on to pursue ordained ministry, and so we have helped pay for part of their education. In the years when we do not have somebody in seminary, that gift is simply given on to Austin Presbyterian Seminary. Now, one other thing that happens is that sessions will designate funds And session-designated funds are different than donor-restricted funds. A donor-restricted fund is the donor directing how the fund shall be used. I give this for flowers for the church. Session-designated fund is, let's imagine that at the end of the year, the session has $10,000 extra and so it says, you know what we need to do? We need to have an insurance reserve fund just in case we have an insurance claim, and we'll pay for part of the deductible. So let's create an insurance reserve fund, and we'll designate this $10,000 for that insurance reserve fund. It may sit there for 15, 20 or more years and never be used, but because it was a session-designated fund, the session can change the designation of that fund anytime they want to. Because the donors didn't restrict the fund. The donors simply gave the money into the church. At the end of the year, there was this excess surplus. The session decided that surplus should be designated for particular use. The session can change its mind. So let's say that the air conditioning goes out and you need $10,000 to help pay for the air conditioning. You say, well, yeah, that insurance reserve fund was a great idea, but that's not the immediate need. The immediate need is to pay for these air conditioning systems. So we're going to redesignate that fund from paying for an insurance reserve to paying for air conditioning. Now, that gets a little confusing, and hopefully whoever is keeping your books keeps track of which funds or which. In our accounting system at Parkway, we sometimes have to go back to the bookkeeper and the treasurer to kind of track some of that down, because it does get a little bit confusing. So for instance, we have two separate gifts in the properties area. One is for a sprinkler system, like $5,000. They wanted to have a water sprinkling system on one side of our property. The problem is there's no water line on that side of the property, and so it would be about $35,000 to get the water line there, let alone then the piping for the sprinkler system itself. So that money is going to sit there for a long, long time unless we can encourage the donors to change or lift the restriction. We also have some money that's been set aside for an entry ramp situation into the building. And again, it is not adequate to pay for the entirety of the project, and it hasn't been deemed to be a high enough priority for us to try to raise other money that would eventually generate enough to be able to do the project. So again, it's going to sit there for a while. And hopefully along the line, people will remember that these were actually donor-restricted gifts. They were not session-designated gifts. So when this all became very clear to me, I came up with this scenario that I think is marvelously confusing but illustrative of the point. The church decides it's going to have a rummage sale, and the rummage sale is Saturday. Now, when people come and they buy rummage, they're not really buying rummage. Well, yes, they are, but they're making a donation to the church. And the church gathers up all those donations. Let's say they end up with $2,000 at the end of the day. And they put it in a rummage sale fund. They said, this is the fund we raised at the rummage sale. That's a session-designated fund. And if at some point in time the session says, let's take that designated fund that we used for the rummage sale and let's put a new sign out in front of the church. No problem. Away we go. Now, let's say that the session meets prior to the rummage sale. And the session says, hey, let's take the proceeds from the rummage sale and put it in a fund to buy a new sign for the front of the church. Now, when people come through and they buy rummage, what they're really doing is they are making a restricted gift to the church for a sign. You see that? Now, that money that was raised at the rummage sale, it was not a session-designated fund. It was a donor-restricted fund. because the session had already made the decision that whatever was raised would go towards that cause. And they made that decision before the rummage sale happened. And then to make things either confusing, let's suppose that the rummage sale ran on 2 separate weekends with a session meeting in between. And the session decides that the money raised at the rummage sale will go towards a new sign. There are 2 different types of money now. The money that came in prior to the session meeting was a general donation to the life of the church. The session designates it for the sign. That's a session designated fund. And the session decides that any funds raised the next week will also go to the sign. Now those gifts are donor restricted funds and have to be used for the sign. Confused yet? Yeah, that's the sort of thing for which you need good record keeping and somebody that can track that down. Because again, you have a fiduciary responsibility. If a donor gives you a gift for a particular purpose and you accept the gift, you have to use it for that purpose. You cannot change it unless you can get the donor to change the restriction. So your record keeping about that is pretty important. The other thing that most churches need, and we've kind of looked at one at Parkway but haven't finally figured it out, is a policy, gift policy. What gifts will you receive and what gifts won't you receive? Because sometimes people want to give you money for something you don't particularly want or need. The other thing about budgets is that budgets are in many ways a de facto mission statement. If you want to know what a church is doing in mission, look at their budget. If they have a lot of money going into building maintenance, that's to be expected. If they get a lot of money going into personnel, that's to be expected. The 2 biggest expenses at every church in the United States are personnel first and maintenance of the building second. But how much are they spending on youth ministry? What are they spending on their music program? What are they spending on outreach? So that's how a budget becomes a de facto mission statement. If you haven't defined what your mission is, like our primary mission is going to be we're going to take the gospel of Jesus Christ to the whole world. Let's say that's your mission statement. And then you look at the budget and say in mission giving, you've got 2%. Then your budget is not reflecting what your mission is. Your budget's telling you what your mission is. Oh, most of your money is going towards your church music program. So your mission really is to have a fine music program, which is a fine mission. It just may not be the same one that you would define otherwise. So that's an important part to look at, to see that your budget is an adequate reflection of what you're trying to do in mission, and that they're not at odds with one another. The other part of church finances, of course, is the income side, not just the expense side. It is that raising funds for the life of the church. And a lot of people don't want anything to do with that, which is too bad, because it is an important ministry. This little book, A Spirituality of Fundraising, by Henry Nouwen. It's edited by John Mugabgab. This is from the Spirituality series. It comes out of Upper Room Ministries. The whole book is like 64 pages, and the text from Henry Nouwen really doesn't even start until page 16. So it is a short gem, absolute gem. Because what Nouwen talks about is indeed the spirituality of fundraising. And as a member of the session, you should be in the forefront of raising funds for your church, both your personal stewardship and your promotion of stewardship in the life of the church. You are responsible for the church. You're responsible for the life, the quality of its mission, and the quality of the spiritual life of the congregation. And a part of what you can do in mission and ministry is directly tied into what you have in income coming in. I tell our session that they are responsible for that ancient practice of alchemy. You remember in the old stories, there was always some wizard that was trying to figure out how to turn a common metal like lead into gold. And if they could figure that out, that was the practice of alchemy. In the church, there is alchemy as well. And it is to exchange the funds that individuals give to the church and change it into ministry. It is to take money and make ministry happen with it. And that's one of the wonders about this little book by Henry Nouwen. What he says, and I'll give you the cliff notes of a very, very short book to start with, is that you're not asking people to give money to the church. It's not what you're asking. You're asking people to buy into your dream of ministry. That's what you're doing. So the example that I use is that you have someone at your church who you think would really benefit by going to the women's conference at Moe Ranch, but you know that the individual can't pay for it herself. And so you go to one of the donors of the church and you might say, hey, John, we think that Sally would really benefit by going up to the women's conference. She can't afford to go. It's a little expensive. It's $300. Do you think you could do that and help us out? Maybe just a little portion of that, you know. Maybe yes, maybe no, right? But let's try getting John to buy into the dream of the mission and ministry. Right? So you go to John and you say, John, Sally is really growing in her spiritual life. She is getting on fire for Jesus. And we think that if we could get her to the women's conference at Moe Ranch, she would come back a ball of fire and she could transform what we're doing in women's ministry. And you know, she's already working with our kids, and her enthusiasm would just be infectious for this congregation. So we want to help her have a great spiritual experience. Can you help us get her to the Moe Ranch Women's Conference? Same $300. Totally different appeal. When you're asking people for money for the church, you're asking them to help you in ministry. You're not asking them to pay for lights. You're not asking them to pay for plumbing. You're not asking them to pay the insurance bill or support the insurance reserve fund. You're asking them to help you create and sustain a ministry. And if you will do that, they will respond generously. So good luck with both ferreting out the mission of the church as you look at different financial statements and keeping track of which funds are which and how they can best be used. And please do not ever shy away from asking someone to support the ministry of your church. If you don't support the ministry of the church, it's going to be hard for them to. You should be excited about what your church is doing, about where it's going, and then invite them to join you in that dream. Okay, that's it on finances.